When I grew up in Harlem in the 40s and 50s, I never heard a gunshot.
Well, let me read what you say in your preface. You say, "Let me state here, and now that these essays do not mean, one, all Southern whites were or are rednecks; two, all black Americans today or in the past were or are black rednecks. One cannot predict," you write, "much less forestall all the clever misinterpretations that others might put on one's words. The most that can be done is to alert honest people to the problem." Black rednecks, who are they?
These would be blacks who came out of the Southern culture and who carried that culture with them north into the urban ghettos and into the ghettos of the South for that matter, and who have not moved out of that culture since. Over the years, both blacks and whites have moved away from that culture. But in the poorest and worst of the ghetto areas, there are lots of people who have not. And these kinds, it's a culture which didn't do whites any good, and it's certainly not doing blacks any good today. And the tragedy is that people regard this culture as somehow the authentic black culture, and therefore you're not to interfere with it.
I'm proud. All right, before we get to AOC's fake Southern accent, I totally agree with him. I don't like a lot of what mainstream or even the black community calls black culture. I never consider certain things to be black culture. I considered it to be urban culture. If you take a white person and they are born and raised in an urban area, they are going to manifest the same characteristic traits as a black person who is born and raised in an urban area. So it's not inherently black, it's just urban, it's just the location. If you have a black person that grows up in Japan, they're going to have more of a Japanese culture and Japanese characteristics regardless of their skin color. So it's culture, definitely culture, not race. And so I guess like what I consider to be urban culture, he is saying that is like redneck culture, which to me seems more like a lower economic situation. Not everybody who grows up in urban areas are low economic. Like some people who grow up in urban areas have money. And also like I just hate the fact that like so many of the most degenerate like toxic behaviors and traits are like correlated with blackness, like, you know, baby mama culture, baby daddy side chick culture, ebonics, sagging your pants, like the most ratchetest gangsterist rap music that's all about bitches and hoes and drugs and gangster rap. Being a gangbanger even is correlated with black culture, or even just Hispanic culture, black and brown culture or whatever. It's like, why are we owning like the most toxic ghetto ass crap? Like you see a white girl with her skin tanned a little bit too dark and she's talking like she ain't got no education, and she's talking with ebonics, and she like all her mannerisms are super ghetto, and everybody's like, oh, why is she acting black? I'm like, why is that black? Like, why are we trying to own that? It makes no sense to me. Anyway guys, I forgot to introduce myself. Welcome to Speak Freely here, where we celebrate the freedom of speech, and we are reacting to Thomas Sowell, and he's going to basically talk about the root of urban black redneck culture that comes from like the poor southern white redneck culture. All right, so getting right back into it.
The authentic black culture, and therefore you're not to interfere with it.
I'm proud to be a bartender. Ain't nothing wrong with that.
I don't feel no ways tired. I come too far from where I started from.
Black English is considered not quite proper English. On the other hand, if blacks happen to have all the power and own all the corporations and whites were working for them, it would be the other way around.
There was a period, I'm trying to remember now, I believe it was in the mid-70s, when substandard English began to become viewed as a discipline of its own within linguistic studies and so forth. And for all I know, it was all perfectly legitimate that certain speech patterns would be traced back to various regions in Africa and so forth. And this is a language of its own. It has its own validity. But the argument, your argument would be, I don't really care what its validity is. It's holding people back. It's preventing them from participating in the wider society. Is that right?
Absolutely. And also, none of these things went back to Africa.
Oh, is that so?
No, you can, yes, they did not go back to Africa.
Oh no, I'm stopping it again. Yes, Ebonics is not traced down to Africa. And I remember when the black community, and there was a conversation about that is racist to discriminate against Ebonics. And it's like, I don't really understand that. Again, it's not a black thing, it is a urban thing, not a black thing. I've heard black Americans talk about how the fact that because we were ripped from Africa, we were ripped from our African roots, that black people are just sort of searching for their own culture within America, and this is our language, this is our lingo, so you must respect it. And I get that to a certain extent, but like, do you really think Jay-Z goes into the producers' offices or goes speak to the lawyers or their managers, and when they're trying to make a deal with someone to make billions of dollars or millions of dollars, do you really think they go into those meetings going, yo, baby, what's up? No, they talk properly. They talk like they have a high IQ. They talk like they are businessmen, right? So there's a time and a place for these things, but I agree that it's holding people back, because again, you're not going to go into like a job interview and like, yo baby, like talking all ebonics and weird and stuff. You're gonna talk properly so you can get that job. And if you don't teach that to young people, then they're not gonna be able to get the job that they want. So I do think it is holding people back, even though I understand the conversation around black people trying to find their culture within America, and so this is our language, so respect it kind of thing. But at the same time, like, no. You know what I mean? I don't want that to be correlated with blackness. I want that to be correlated with urbanness. So if you are black and you grew up in an urban area, then that makes sense. But it doesn't matter whether you're black, white, Chinese, whatever. If you grow up in an urban area, you're going to pick up that lingo no matter what your skin color is. Anyway, let's continue.
If you look at the peach, for example, using the word axe for ask and stuff like that, all of that goes back to the South. And it goes back to the parts of Britain from which white Southerners came. So if you trace the calling hog entrails chitlins, that was in a certain section of Britain, the section from which whites moved into the South, and they were known as rednecks and crackers in Britain in centuries past, before they ever set foot in the South. So the whole thing is as phony as the $3 bill.
All right, stopping it there. Okay, so he talked about the chitlins. I've never had chitlins. I know what it smells like because a lot of people in my family love chitlins, and we had it at family gatherings and barbecues and holidays and stuff like that. I didn't know that it originated from, I guess, like old white southern poor redneck area in Britain. I was always taught that chitlins was slave food, and slave food is basically like all the bits and bobs and the organ pieces of an animal that was kind of discarded and unwanted and give it to the slaves, and the slaves had to just make do with it and make it taste as good as it possibly can. And chitlins was one of them, and chitlins is still something that a lot of the black community still holds on to. A lot of people stop eating it because of what it is and what it smells like, but a lot of people, especially in my family, still eat it. But I was raised in a Muslim household up until a certain age, and so I guess that was like the one benefit of being born Muslim or raised Muslim, is that I didn't eat chitlins because we didn't eat pork, because again, Muslim, Nation of Islam. So yeah, that's interesting. Anyway, let's get back into it.
In Intellectuals and Race, you cite an observation by the intelligence expert, IQ scientist James Flynn, that just stopped me cold. After the Second World War, you've got large numbers of American troops remaining in Germany. For that matter, there's still several tens of thousands there today. And both black and white American soldiers had children with German women. And Flynn discovered that those children growing up in Germany showed no IQ differences at all. The black kids and the white kids, the same. Professor Flynn concluded that the reason was that the offspring of black soldiers in Germany grew up in a nation with no black subculture, close quote. Which means what? Which means they experienced exactly the same expectations. Is this
No, the expectations are external. The culture in which they grew up was not the culture in which black kids grew up in America today.
So they had...
There's no gangster rap that was pervasively available in Germany.
So here's what I'm getting. There is something about black subculture in America today that holds African Americans themselves back?
Yes. Because that very same subculture held whites in the South back as well. That in the time, this mental testing in the First World War turned up, among other things, the fact that whites from various 4 or 5 southern states scored lower on the mental test than blacks from 4 or 5 northern states. And so it really was a question of the subculture that was there, which was a handicap to both. I could go on for days about the social degeneration, but let me give you just one quick example.
Whoa, okay. Black subculture. This is a really touchy conversation and emotional conversation for a lot of black people, because black people, like a lot of communities, tend to be very, very proud of their culture. That doesn't mean within the black community this conversation doesn't come up, because I've had conversations online and in person where black people do discuss the toxic aspects of what we try to call black culture or blackness, and how we should get rid of it or dismiss it or not take ownership of it. But they will still get a lot of pushback from other black people saying like, no, this is our culture, and it's, you know, racism or colonialism or the patriarchy or whatever, trying to sort of snuff it out or say that this is the reason why the black community has been held back. I personally agree with this aspect, that I do believe it's very much culture. And it's like when people excuse crime or criminality or the idea of having lots of children out of wedlock or lots of baby daddies and stuff like that. They blame it on poverty, and I do believe poverty plays a part in it, but there's a lot of cultures on this planet that are poor that don't go to crime. I've seen it with my own eyes. Like, again, I travel, I live abroad, and I've been to lots of countries that are considered developing. I put it in quotes because there's a lot of very well-developed countries that are still considered developing. However, there's parts of those countries that are still underdeveloped. And I've seen the poorest of these countries, and they don't have high crime. They don't have broken families. They actually usually have really strong family structure because of that's the culture. You know, staying with your kids, having kids, getting married and stuff like that, that's the culture, right? They very much emphasize in getting in higher education, because that's pretty much sometimes the only way out of their poverty, right? They emphasize on, you know, helping the family and helping the community. Like, if your uncle gets a business, then the uncle hires the nephew, and the nephew makes sure his kids gets a job. Like, it's very much in the culture of that. So not just because you're poor or you're living in poverty means inherently you're going to be a criminal, inherently you have to go into gang banging, inherently you're going to have, you know, 5 different babies, 5 different baby daddies. That is a culture, and it's our culture because it's culturally accepted. And again, if you demonize it or if you say that's wrong, then you're labeled a racist or a misogynist or a bigot or whatever. I've talked about this before on my other channel. See if I can find it. I think I tried to find it before I couldn't. But when the welfare reform was happening, because they were trying to include the black community, because at first, yes, the welfare system was quite racist. They only sort of supported white people and not black people. When it was reformed, there was a politician that had came out and said that he thinks that some of that money should go into creating job programs and pregnancy prevention and family planning and job training programs and educational programs in the black community, because he was saying that he sees a very scary sort of, because he saw where the single mother rate was heading in the black community. Back then it was only in the 20%, right? Now it's over 70%. And he says, hey, this is weird, we need to help these people because we don't want this single parent percentage to go up, right? And what he was told is that what he said was racist, and that single black motherhood was a black culture, that they got it from Africa, of, you know, there's no traditional 2-parent homes in Africa. The village raises the kids. So in telling women that they should keep the fathers in a home, that's actually racist, and it's culturally insensitive, because at the time the single parenthood was so high in the black community. Instead of tackling that, they just went, oh, it must just be black culture, it must just be their thing, let's not even touch it, let's not even talk about it, right? It's the same thing when I talk about the crime rate and the homicide rate. It seems like the media only cares about black people dying if it's the hands of another person of another race, mainly white people. But when black people are shooting themselves all the time in Chicago and other urban cities, it's like, well, it's kind of like their culture, it's their thing, that's what they do, kind of thing. No one says that, but no one touches on it because it's going to sound racist, right? And so I totally agree with him that a lot of the downfall and a lot of the things that are holding the black community back is the culture. And I also think a part of that culture is victim culture, victim mentality, this oppression culture that we have, this lack of accountability and responsibility, because everything's the system. It's the systematic racism and there's everything else. There's like, even if you live in a really, really unfair society, you still have choices and you still can make better choices. And again, it's not that these conversations don't happen within the Black community, they just don't get a platform, they don't get a giant voice, there's not a megaphone, there's no super Black celebrity talking about these things, right? So they get hit and they get pushed away. We do talk about these things, but it still gets a lot of pushback within the Black community. Like even when I brought up, I saw this mom on, I know I'm going on a rant, but just stay with me. I saw this mom like beating a crap out of her daughter on Instagram because her daughter was making a TikTok. And it wasn't even like super sexual or anything. Her daughter was just making a TikTok and the mom came in and just started beating and wailing on her kid. And there was half the Black people, because this is a very, like, a lot of the audience for this Instagram page is Black, mostly Black women. And half of the Black people are like, yeah, that's what she did. She get her ass beat, yeah. And then other half, like me, was like, why are we perpetuating this idea of beating the crap out of our kids for like the smallest fucking things? Like when there's so much psychological papers proving that stuff messes up your kids in the long run. And what I got in response was, this is just our culture. This is Blackness. We beat our kids. My mom whipped me like this. My dad whipped his dad. His dad got whipped like this. This is what we do. Instead of just being like, let's talk about changing the culture and bettering and improving and evolving. I know I just went on a huge rant. I'm getting back to Thomas Sowell. I am sorry.
When I grew up in Harlem in the 40s and 50s, I never heard a gunshot. Now, I'm sure someone fired a gun somewhere in Harlem, but it was not such a pervasive thing that you had to hear it. You know, I have relatives in Washington. I asked them the same question, people in my generation.
Growing up in Washington, D.C.
Yes, and low-income Black neighborhoods. Did you ever hear a gunshot when you were growing up? And the answer was no. I have relatives in North Carolina. I asked the same question. No. And now, you know, people in housing projects especially, they put kids, some of them, to bed in bathtubs so that they won't be hit by stray bullets in the night. Now we take it for granted that there's crimes, tremendous levels of crime and violence in the Black community. That was not always the case. In the 20s, it was very common for white celebrities, including George Gershwin and William Faulkner, to go up to Harlem not only for entertainment places, but to go into private homes of people they knew. And Gershwin played Rhapsody in Blue in this home where Walter White lived. Milton Friedman, when he was a graduate student at Columbia, he and the lady he later married would go dancing at the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem. And he said, we had no fear of being mugged or accosted on the street or anything like that.
I've heard you say, Tom, when you were a boy growing up in Harlem yourself, your own neighborhood felt totally safe to you.
Not totally safe. I wouldn't exaggerate, but there's nothing resembling today. I mean, I did sleep on hot nights. I would sleep out on the fire escape. When I tell people in Harlem that today, they think I'm from another galaxy, you know. But that people slept on the fire escapes in New York and in the public parks in the 30s, all over the city, because it was not a jungle. And you could run through a great number of other things. Children raised without two parents present. That was about 22% in 1960. One generation later, it was 67%, and it's gone up a little since then as well.
Stopping it there, I love that he talked about that, how it used to be back then in Harlem, how you felt safe, you didn't hear guns. I remember up until I was like 8 years old, that's how it felt. Like, I lived in that right when I was 8 was around the time where you could just run wild in the street and you had to come home when the street lights came on. The only thing I wasn't allowed to do was cross the street by myself, so I had to get my older brother or something like that. But around like 8 or 9 is when I feel like a lot of that shifted, and I do remember like not hearing gunshots all the time, but like for like New Year's Eve we would hear gunshots, and like New Year's Eve we had to stay on the floor like the entire night because of this gunshots. But like now that I'm out of the state, and it's funny because again, like people think it's so dangerous to travel, and especially if you mention somewhere like India, right? And you see that here. Like, I get literally emotional. Like, I literally get emotional when I see the kids playing outside. Cause, I mean, I'm pretty sure in middle of America that still exists. But when I lived in America, like, for years before I left America, by the time I was like a teenager, you just didn't see that anymore. Kids out here running around, climbing trees, getting dirty, hopping on their bikes, you know, playing, not rugby, what is the game here? Playing cricket and playing football or soccer or however you want to call it, playing volleyball, running around with their friends, and no one's scared that this kid is going to get kidnapped. You see like little kids running around all the time. People leave their doors unlocked, especially like countrysides and Thailand and stuff like that, and Laos, people leave their doors open. No one's scared of getting robbed. People like will just go to sleep in the streets, especially like the town drunks and stuff like that, or just sleep in the parks or whatever, sleep on the beach, camp on the beach. Like, people do this all the time. And it's just the culture. Like, I'm not saying there's not crime in India. There's definitely crime in India. And there's crime in any country, but it's just like, that's just the way the culture is. And Thailand is very well known. Like, I've left my phone, my camera, my money, I've left it behind for hours before I came back. It was still sitting in the same place, or some nice Thai person put it away from me. Like, it's the culture. It's not like economics. I understand desperate people do desperate things, but when it's drilled into your culture, where if you steal, you are shaming your family, you are shaming the legacy of your family, you'll be publicly shamed for the rest of your life, and your children will be shamed. That will stop people from doing shit. But when you have a whole coalition of progressive liberals going, oh, but they're past and they came from poverty and we have to excuse all their behavior because of this, then people are less likely to feel that internal moral shame for doing something wrong. It's the culture. It's completely 100% the culture. But let's continue.
Children raised without two parents present. That was about 22% in 1960. One generation later, it was 67%, and it's gone up a little since then as well. And now the rate among whites is higher than it was among blacks in 1960.
Right.
All right, that's it, guys. So Thomas Sowell has made a couple of videos on this, and so I reacted to all parts of it. So I'm going to be breaking this series up into parts. I might even break this particular reaction up into parts because it's quite long already. We'll see. I really enjoyed that more than I thought I would, because I have actually heard this before, but I didn't, I guess, listen to it as intensely as I'm listening to it now. I would 100% agree with him. It is culture, and a lot of what hold people's back is the culture, is the whole nature versus nurture thing. And a lot of reasons why people are uplifted and succeed is because a lot of times it's their culture. It's not always. There is still individuality. So just because you're like, oh, I was raised in this culture, I have no choice but to be degenerate or whatever, or like, you have a choice to evolve and develop as a human being, right? And I guess, I don't know what makes some people choose to do that and other people choose not to do that if they were raised in the exact same environment. I have no idea. I would love to learn why people choose different decisions if they're raised in the same environment. I don't know why, but people do, and you have the choice to do that. And nothing wrong with being proud of your culture, even if it is, you know, looked down upon or degenerate or not the best examples of ways to live your life. But as we get older, you're supposed to evolve and do better so you can pass down a better mentality to your children and the next generation. But yes, a lot of the reasons is culture, a lot of the reasons why you see Asian cultures do so well when it comes to education and owning businesses and jobs and stuff like that is because of their culture. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen Indian culture push education and push entrepreneurship and keep it in the family. I've seen in Thailand they do that. I've seen it. It's in Vietnam, like, it's in their culture. But anyway, that's it, guys. Tell me what you think. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm not going to keep it too long because this video is already getting long. Just like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And you guys have an amazing day. Hit the bell to get the notifications. Okay, bye.